So, first question: who's read the chapters? Orange light if you read the chapters.
Hold on, sorry, one more question. What book is it? You broke up. You broke up
Sorry,
during it.
I'm eating my last cracker. Just a second.
It's The
chapters
Great
8 and 9.
Divorce. It's The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis.
No, I've never heard of that book.
Okay. Well, so far from what I have gleaned from it, absolutely fantastic. Totally worth your time. So let's just start off with this. What did you guys? Excuse me. What were you guys thinking about these chapters? Chapter 8 pretty short. Chapter 9 definitely longer. And chapter 9 probably was the meatier of the two chapters. But yeah, what were some thoughts? Let's start with chapter 8. What did you think about the little short chapter 8? Kessa, you've kept your light orange. I can only assume that you have something to say. Well, now nobody has anything to say, so this is going great.
Well, okay, fine.
There it is. All right. What's up?
It's a point of transition in that he starts having doubts about whether this is actually a good place and whether the bright spirits are actually well-intentioned.
Mm-hmm. And what caused that? Why did he start to doubt? Bad company, yeah. Yeah, there was the what was he called in chapter 7? The hard-bitten ghost. Yeah, he was very not entirely trusting of the bright spirits. And so that caused C.S. Lewis, his character, to be like, he had some really interesting points. He's like, do I really trust that everything here is going well? Sean, your light.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this is my first book study, so I'm just listening in. That's all.
That's fine. That's no problem. You are more than welcome to sit in and listen in. Yeah, and it wasn't just the bright spirits that were concerning him. Just like simple weather, because the grass and everything is just so much more weighty. Or more, it's more real, and so even the smallest things pose a huge threat. Like even a raindrop, or he said like an insect landing on him could crush him. Yeah. And so he's suddenly terrified, and as he's in this state of increasing paranoia at his situation, what happens? What does he see?
No, just self. I've never read this book, so
That's fine. There are only 3 people in here apparently have read these chapters, so
It's also been 2 weeks.
Who is the book by?
C.S. Lewis.
Down in the chat.
I accidentally closed the chat, and now I can't get it back up. Wait a minute.
Guess so. Go ahead.
Self-conscious ghost.
Yeah. Other ghosts. These guys are just everywhere. How many of them came up on the bus, do you wonder? So, this self-conscious ghost. So I was going to ask what was her deal, but you kind of already nailed that. But let's dive into her a little bit more. What's her thing? What's her shtick? What's her contention with the bright spirits? Or spirit, I guess as it was. Yeah. I would, if I was going to pick a word or a description of her, the self-conscious is really good. She feels very inadequate to really be going out to be seen. She feels completely not vulnerable, but insufficiently attired I guess she doesn't feel like she looks the part. She doesn't look right in this place. Yes. And that's a great way of putting it. And in a sense, she understands the and the problem isn't that she isn't dressed right. The ghost says that. She says, I have to find the line. Gotta see if I can find it. Oh, here you go. It said, I'd have never have come at all if I knew you were all going to be dressed like that. And the spirit says, friend, don't you see I'm not dressed at all? Yeah, exactly. It's not that she's not dressed right. It's she understands that she isn't like the bright spirits. She perceives the difference, and she doesn't want anyone to, she doesn't want to be seen and people to recognize the distinct difference like she does. And so the spirit works to try to persuade her to come with him. He's like, you can come with me. It's okay. We all start out like ghosts. Yeah. Oh, I see. We're all a bit ghostly when we first arrive. No, that'll wear off. Just come out and try. And so the spirit is like, look, we all started out that way, but look, we ended up like this. It's okay. Now, does she go with him?
No, yes, both.
Unknown. Kessa's on to my wily ways. Why is it unknown?
Because. Just because.
Go ahead, Kessa.
In his attempt to get her mind off herself and her self-consciousness, the ghost frightens her and Lewis badly enough that, or the author, that he runs away. He doesn't see the conclusion. Right. And, we kind of revisit that a little bit later. That kind of gets explained later, but we'll go ahead and do that. She almost comes to a point where she wants to go, and Lewis is like, he said he wanted to run up and like beg to her to go with him. But ultimately, she just can't get over that hump. And so he blows this horn, and in a very Lewis-like action scene, there are these unicorns that just come up and just rampage through, and the ghost is like, terrified, and so is Lewis, and he runs off.
That yell, though.
Exactly. Literally the last 7 words of the chapter. Never saw the end of that interview. And so as Lewis is taken off, we come into chapter 9. And who do we run into? Well, that's who we've been following. Yeah, Lewis the fanboy comes out. But who's he a fanboy of? Who's this new individual that we encounter?
Come on, people, read through the chapter again. It's always what I do.
George
Easy.
MacDonald. Yeah.
Wait, what? Oh, never mind. I thought you said McDonald's.
George MacDonald. And so what? I love how how this is described. C.S. Lewis is running and this bright spirit calling says, "Where are you going?" said a voice with a strong Scotch accent. And it's just like, oh well, let's just. I love the fact that even in heaven, the Scotch never leaves a person. All right. And so we find out this guy's name is George MacDonald. That's who he was on Earth. Now, who was George MacDonald on Earth? Lewis basically tells us this. But even if you know nothing of the man, you didn't do any biographical research on him, from what C.S. Lewis describes, who is George MacDonald, or who was George MacDonald? I did?
Yeah, when it came up last time.
Dude, it's been a crazy week. I can barely remember 2 days ago.
2 weeks.
But yeah, I can't remember 2 days ago. Much less 2 weeks. Yeah. George MacDonald's a writer. He was he's much like C.S. Lewis, he was a Christian theologian. Well, Christian. And C.S. Lewis, like Kessler said, he goes full fanboy. Yeah, and honestly, I haven't done a lot of research on George MacDonald, so forgive me. But yeah, he's a writer, and C.S. Lewis apparently loved his writings, and he just starts gushing. He's like, "Hey, I love some of your stuff, man. You're great. You're awesome, and just all this amazing stuff." And how does George MacDonald respond to that? Yeah, Kessa.
He very kindly says, "I already know all that and better than you do."
Yes, and he definitely does say that. What I found to be the most he said, "It may save precious time if I inform you that I am already well acquainted with these biographical details." And then I love this little detail he threw in at the end. "In fact, I have noticed that your memory misleads you in one or two particulars." So he just kind of drops that on Lewis, which kind of stops him dead in his tracks. What does that seem to indicate to you? That little statement that George inserts there. Does that strike you in any way? Does that make you think, or kind of, does that make you or give you any idea of George MacDonald's character in this place? Holy clairvoyance? Okay. Go ahead, Kessa.
I think I know what you're
Hey, finally.
He actually has a better grasp of reality than Lewis does.
Yes. And if you were going to put that into a character trait, what would you call that? I want to see if I can, kind of conjure this up out of your mind. What if you were going to say that he has a grasp on reality to the point that he says C.S. Lewis is just basically going full fanboy, saying, "No, you're so great and you're awesome. I love this. And George MacDonald says, "Look, let's cut you short. I already know all about that stuff, and you may be overstating it in a few points." What does that seem to portray to you? What? Humility. Exactly. And that's what I think Kez was really saying. And I like the way you put it. You said you have a greater concept of reality than Lewis does in this place. And why is humility so lined up with the idea that George has a clear idea of reality? How did those synchronize? Oh, yes. We've seen it over and over and over again with the ghosts and the bright spirits. And the whole idea is that whenever the spirits encounter the ghosts are always trying to make these excuses, right? They're trying to either put up these grievances or tell, why things are wrong, or put up what their point is coming here. And normally it's very something to satisfy themselves. But what do the bright spirits always counter with? And Kessa's pretty much already got it. Jack the murderer's he was, I think he was the first spirit we really ran into, one of the first ones. And he says it's all right now. Why is it all right now? Go ahead, Wash.
Well, I was just kind of noticing a deeper underlying message behind the whole thing, that all of the solid spirits and all the solid bright people, they're all speaking truth, while all of the ghosts have some kind of problem with real truth. They have some kind of lie that they're believing. And it seems as though you can't be solid without being 100% in the truth and in Jesus.
And that's the point. The bright spirits have the perspective of eternity. They have this understanding that when you reach this space, and when, in order to become solid, like the bright spirits are, it's not, you have to let go of all these things. That's what all the spirits have been trying to coax out of the ghosts. The one ghost said, you know, the one that was talking to Jack, the murderer. He said, you know, you were a murderer, and well, I've lived a good life and lived according to my morals and all this stuff. And so he's issuing his grievances, and then you have the self-conscious ghost who, she can't go out there because she feels very, you know, she doesn't feel like she's adequate to go out there, and all these problems. Whereas the bright spirits are saying it's all right now. It starts out a little hard, but once you get there, you find out that everything's okay, and that doesn't matter. There's a sufficiency that's found not in you as an individual, but in something else. And so when C.S. Lewis is carrying on to George here, George says, look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but that doesn't matter now, because my sufficiency isn't what I did down there, it's in something else. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes? No? Clear as mud. Sweet. On we go. And this is where things get interesting. And again, I haven't finished reading the book, so I don't want to pass judgment on this chapter yet. Initially, it does bring a bunch of questions to my mind, which I do, just from judging the reading, I feel like these are going to be addressed later. But C.S. Lewis, talking to George, he asked this question. He says, "Sir, I had almost forgotten it, and I have no anxiety about the answer now, though I have still a curiosity. It's about these ghosts. Do any of them stay? Can they stay? Is any real choice offered to them? And how do they come to be here?" And how does George answer? I'm looking at the PDF here, so I don't have the page number. I apologize. But it's not that far into chapter 9, probably on like the second page. With the literature quiz. That is the correct answer. And C.S. Lewis obviously, or he comes out and says, I've heard of some of this stuff. He says, George says, you never heard of the refrigerium? He says, man like you might have read of it in Prudentius, or not to mention Jeremy Taylor. And C.S. Lewis is like, I heard of it, but I don't really remember what it means. And George says it means that the damned have holidays or excursions. And C.S. Lewis asks, excursions to this country? And he says, for those that will take them. And this brings up an interesting question, because at the point, especially throughout this chapter, we get the idea, we really paint the picture of what the Gray City is. And what is the Gray City? Go ahead, Kessa.
It depends.
Okay, go ahead. I'm not letting you say that and then just get off the hook. You're gonna explain that.
It, I believe it's. I'm kind of spoiling the chapter, but McDonald says at some point that as people look back, if they are in heaven and they look back at their time in the Gray City, then to them it may have been Earth. But others who look back, well, they're still there. In the end, they will know it to be hell.
Yes. Now, Chapter 9 does specifically say that the Gray City is hell. They journeyed from hell. And this is the thing that I really want C.S. Lewis to address, haven't quite come to yet. Yeah. Is the idea that the dead can pass from, hell into heaven. And he even says, I can't remember exactly where it is, but he says, that's let's see, where is it? It comes down a little ways. He said, oh, here it is. He says, is there a real choice after death? Addressing the idea that the dead that end up in hell, can they move to heaven? Can that happen? He says, my Roman Catholic friends would be surprised because, to them, souls in purgatory are already saved. And my Protestant friends wouldn't really like it any better because they say the tree lies as it falls. And so Lewis comes out and says, that's a problem with certain people. And George MacDonald kind of gives an answer that isn't in the moment entirely helpful. What does he say? And this is one thing that I love C.S. Lewis for.
Not sure I'm looking at the right conversation.
What he says is, in response to Lewis's comment about the Catholics and the Protestants, what does he say, Kessa?
I've got the quote here.
Yeah. And that is, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. This is C.S. Lewis addressing the idea that God is beyond our understanding. Now, as much as I still think he's going to come back around to the question, like Kessa said, that she kind of spoiled the a future chapter a little bit. The whole idea here is that as humans, we so often get caught up in the minutia, and we forget that there's still a choice to be made, and that choice is the focus. Because we could, it's easy to debate, about, is there can someone be saved after death, and the prayers of someone after they've died to save them? Does the tree, as he says, fall lie as it falls? And George MacDonald says, look, could be either way, both. He says, but listen, why are you concerning yourself with that idea? There is still a choice to be made. And very simply, whereas Lewis's character wants to be diverted to all of these different questions, George MacDonald, again, with that perspective of eternity, again, redirects it and says there's still a choice to be made. It's not about all these sidebar details. There's still Jesus and the decision of going to him or not. And that's amazing. In that, as much as in the Bible study, we talk all the time about these debates that come up about certain verbiage that appears in the scripture, or different words, or what something means. And we're heading into Romans 9, and we're gonna tackle the big one. We're dealing with all of this, but ultimately it still comes back to the fact that there is a choice that needs to be made. And this is just a beautiful. This is a beautiful, just very clear clarion call to people reading this, that, yeah, there are issues that you can debate, but let's not get our eyes off the focus. Then Lewis kind of shows a little bit of his bias and how much he appreciates the works of John Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, of course. And so George MacDonald quotes that, and he says, "The choice of every lost soul can be expressed in the words, 'Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven.'" Now, I'll ask
Excuse
this. How
me,
many... Yeah, go
I
ahead,
have a
Ben.
question.
Go ahead.
Since I have no idea what this book is about, can I mute speakers?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
But have any of you guys read Paradise Lost?
Go fish.
I have not.
Okay. It's oftentimes you'd end up getting assigned it in school, college, probably more likely. It's the tale of humanity, essentially. It starts out with the angels, and in the beginning, Satan falls, tries to rebel against God, and he falls with his demons, and Satan's pride. As he's down in hell, he decides to build a kingdom down there to establish his own rule. And this is probably the most famous line from Paradise Lost. Satan utters this line. He says, "It is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven." And this is what George MacDonald's trying to get across here. He says, "There's always something that they insist on keeping," referring to the ghosts, "even at the price of misery. There's always something they prefer to joy or to reality, which is this place, this place where the bright spirits dwell."
If I may, you could say that they're willing to ignore truth, make it as subjective, or it's a personal preference instead of this is our reality, like it or not. This is our truth, all as one.
And you're right. I think that's definitely, it goes back to the word perspective, because every ghost that's come up here has had their own perspective of why they came here and why they reserve the right to make their choice, either to stick around or to express anger at this place and those that dwell there, or to not come at all. They all have this perspective, whereas the only ones that have the true perspective are these bright spirits, because their perspective isn't based in themselves, but in someone who encompasses all of eternity. And so they see everything from outside of themselves, so they aren't tainted by the subjective. They are seeing everything as God, the Creator, sees it. I'll ask this: What did you guys think of the conversation or the discussion of the vices or the things that the ghosts choose, or the reasons that they don't come, that they don't accept heaven or accept this reality?
Could you repeat the question of why would they don't accept the reality?
George MacDonald in the book, he goes on this little bit of a little bit of a monologue where he's talking about these things that keep people from really pursuing the object of heaven, of eternity. Let's see. Here we go. You see it easily enough in a spoiled child that would sooner miss its play and its supper than say it was sorry and be friends. You call it the sulks. But in adult life, it has 100 fine names: Achilles' wrath and Coriolanus's grandeur. Whew, I got it out. Revenge and injured merit and self-respect and tragic greatness and proper pride. And Lewis's character asks, is there no one lost through the undignified vices, or through mere sensuality? MacDonald says, some are, no doubt. The sensualist, I'll allow you, begins by pursuing a real pleasure, though a small one. His sin is the less. But the time comes on when, though the pleasure become less and less, and the craving fiercer and fiercer, though he knows that joy can never come that way, yet he prefers joy to the mere fondling of unappeasable lust, and would not have it taken from him. He'd fight to the death to keep it. He'd like well to be able to scratch, but even when he can scratch no more, he'd rather itch than not. What do you guys think of that little section there? And he kind of goes on a little bit more, how it takes up different forms. But what do you guys think of that? That whole idea of wanting to chase after something and wanting to find pleasure in it, and as much as you pursue it and you keep wanting more and more from it, you can only get so much, and yet your pursuit of it pulls you away from the things that are really important.
I guess you could say it's more adventurous for some, I would say they rather go for this obscure, quick answer than a true answer that would actually take hard work. As best
I'm not entirely sure I caught all that. I think I might have been breaking in and out, because I only caught a little bit of that.
I heard him, so it's on your end. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
As best as I can tell, a lot of people tend to stick with their own vices, because sometimes they don't want to go anywhere else.
Okay.
They're not willing to make they see the problem, they're not willing to make the choices of, okay, I see the problem, I need to make drastic changes to fix this problem to have the utmost better life. As far as I can tell from the last few paragraphs you have said.
Okay. Yeah, so your light's orange.
It reminds me of what Lewis says later on in this book and in other books, I'm pretty sure, about how any good thing set up as God becomes something awful. Ultimately. Bob's got it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that gets me is how simple it is to really go down that road. To find something, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think the thing that really we keep coming back to this is this idea of perspective. We see this thing that we really want, and again, it might not be a bad thing. But we pursue it, and then we realize that there's no long-lasting, fulfilling joy in that, and yet because we desire it so much, we keep going after it, and it distracts us, and it pulls away from that thing that really can satisfy this one true joy that George understands, that all the bright spirits have understood. He offers the example of someone who, is going after research. Does this character even have a name? Archibald. Talks about Archibald, who's going up on psychical research and all this stuff. And and he's constantly going after research and research and research and research. And he said he ended up taking the journey to heaven, and he said, "Hey, I want to go investigate this." And they said, and when he went there to heaven, he took the trip to the mountains. Let's see, where is it at? And George asked, "But do you think that did him any good? This country was no use to him at all. Everyone here had survived already. Nobody took the least interest in the question. There was nothing more to prove. His occupation was clean gone. Of course, if he only would have admitted that he'd mistaken the means for the end and had a good laugh at himself, he could have begun all over again like a little child and entered into joy. But he wouldn't do that. He cared nothing about joy, and in the end, he went away." And then I love this is so good what C.S. Lewis writes here. He says, his character says, "How fantastic!" And George says, "Do you think so? It's nearer to such as you than you think. There have been men before now who got so interested in proving the existence of God that they came to care nothing for God himself, as if the good Lord had nothing to do but exist. There have been some who were so occupied in spreading Christianity that they never gave a thought to Christ. You see it in smaller matters. Did you never know a lover of books that with all his first editions and signed copies had lost the power to read them? Or an organizer of charities that had lost all love for the poor? It is the subtlest of all snares."
I would say so.
And that is amazing to me. Yes. The Church of Ephesus. They got so involved in doing that they forgot the reason for the doing. They left first love.
I would say that can happen every day of not remembering the reason why you do the things you do.
Exactly. Again, we keep coming back to this. Perspective. My pastor likes to put it this way. He says, "What gets you up in the morning? It's easy to come to church. It's easy to say amen when the pastor's preaching. It's easy to read your Bible and sing out loud when you're in the presence of believers. When you get up on Monday morning, you got to go into work. Then does that holy perspective stay with you?"
Well, and I've been also doing some research. Even a psychologist says, why haven't you fallen depressed, and just people that are addicts, why don't they die immediately because of overdose? Because how do they still survive from not killing themselves?
Oh man, there's so much of this chapter left. I don't want to keep you guys forever, but I do want to hit specifically one more point. Because this ties into the Bible study. C.S. Lewis asked George, he says, "What about the poor ghosts who never get in the bus at all?" They're talking about, Lewis has asked, why don't the spirits do more? I think he says he was looking for a more militant charity, I think is the term. And George says something really pretty incredible. He says, "Everyone who wishes it does. Don't worry, never fear. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those to whom God says in the end, 'Thy will be done.'" What did you guys think of that?
I would say,
Oh, I'm actually going to let Kessa take that because her light is orange.
okay, no, that's fine.
The first time I read this was at least a decade ago, and that was mind blowing for me. I'd never had that concept in my head before.
Yeah, that definitely rattled my cage. But as I looked at it and the more I thought about it, I was like, I can't really disagree with it. And that comes back to our Bible study because we're talking about the A versus the C, and we're going to address that. But this ties into that, in that ultimately there is still a choice, regardless of what you think about it, or not talking about it, depending on kind of. Shut up. Thank you for paying attention, though. Exactly. But there is still very blatantly the idea of choice and free will, because those who want it find it, and he quotes scripture in stating that. I gotta go back and find it again. Where it go? Yeah, there it is. All who that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there would be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek find, and to those who knock, it is opened. And I love how he just throws that in there. It's like, yeah, in case you're wondering where I'm pulling this from, I got a little backup. I know there's a lot more to this chapter, but we're already like 10 minutes past 9. And I don't want to keep you guys like forever, because you guys know how I roll. But I will ask this before we go. Were there any other questions or thoughts that you guys specifically had from the from chapter 9 or chapter 8, I guess? Wash, go ahead.
Well, one that I highlighted was the section where he was talking about suffering, and I know a lot about suffering right now, but what I highlighted was the good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven. And I thought that with everything I'm learning about resilience and suffering and all kinds of things right now, it just kind of summed it all up in a way only C.S. Lewis can. Or George MacDonald.
Whoever. Yeah, I'm trying to remember, because I did go a little further ahead, and I don't want to be giving this away. But chapter 9, is chapter 9 the one that talks about heaven and hell working backwards?
Yes, that's the section.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was awesome. The whole idea of, to one, as Kessa said earlier, to those that choose heaven doesn't just start at one point and work forwards from that one point. When you choose it, it works backwards, and hell does the same thing. And in that, he's kind of addressing that question that was asked at first, or about that choice. He says, look, both could be right. It's addressing the idea that eternity and God exist outside of time, and what is redeemed, it doesn't just redeem those that are redeemed don't just get redeemed from one point forward, it redeems everything. And whereas those that choose hell don't get to choose hell from, a 1 point forward, but everything is condemned. And I think that was really an interesting concept that I'd never really considered, at least not in those terms before. Yeah, excellent. Anything else, guys? Yeah, Kessa.
The way that some people go to hell over sins that Lewis at first glance considers almost harmless.
Yeah, I was up near 50%. I'm sorry. Try again. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the talkative ghost as she was. The whole idea of the grumble and the grumbler, correct? Yeah. And he does tie that into the bigger idea. He goes back to the whole thing that every ghost comes here with some sort of grievance or some sort of issue that prevents them from going with the spirits into the mountains. And that kind of is a interesting nod to the idea that even the small things, if it keeps you from heaven, is still what puts you in hell. Because
they're
you
pretty
choose
much-
to be. Oh, go ahead. Go. I'm sorry.
No problem. I can cut in. I was gonna say, it's just they're all things that you have chosen and have decided are, heaven isn't good enough for you because of X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. I love the example of the painter right at the end of the chapter. Guess it connects with the artistic centers. All right, we'll see you, Egren.
Yeah. Just only one prayer request, just for me to understand how to debate on relatives.
Oh, all right. Let's see. Yeah, this painter is just completely caught up in the idea of painting. He's like, "Hey, when do I get to paint?" And he's like, "You've left the idea of painting." And he's like, "Oh, well, I'll." He's like, initially he says, "Yeah, I'll go with you to uh in the mountains." And so he starts going. He's like, "How soon do you think I can get painting?" And the spirit's like, "Dude, it's not about the painting." He says, "You got to realize you got to if you just focus on the painting, you miss everything that's around you. You miss where you are and everything that there is to see." And the ghost is like, "Oh well, you grew out of that." And the spirit's like, "Yeah, I outgrew that too, and I had to be corrected." There was a line that I was looking for. Oh yeah. The ghost is like, I would love to see some of the other really uh famous painters. Says, surely in the case of distinguished people you'd hear. And then the spirit says, well, they aren't distinguished no more than anyone else. Don't you understand? The glory flows into everyone and back from everyone like light and mirrors, but the light's the thing. Okay, see you, Bob. It's the idea of understanding what's important and understanding what's not. That's really the fantastic thing, and that it's what I feel like C.S. Lewis doesn't harp on it because he makes it just so easily understood and makes it so simple to grasp without being overbearing on it. Yeah. Go ahead, Wash.
I think the funniest part of that is the fact that the painter in life tries to capture a glimpse of heaven in everything he does.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spirit just looks at him and goes, "But you're here now. You're already here. There's no need for all that."
Exactly. Right. He says you're going on and on and on trying to capture this thing where we don't need to try to capture it. You're already here. We've got it.
Just look around.
Yeah. And then in the end, when he finds out that, he's basically being forgotten, he's being left behind, he's completely offended and refuses to stick around. Yep. And that's exactly where he ended up. And I was going to say we were going to stop before we got to the end of the chapter, but hey, it's the end of the chapter. Magic. So yeah, this is really, we finally starting to get to the point where a lot of stuff is becoming clear. I feel like Lewis is really starting to explain some stuff and address a lot of questions that are a lot of the questions are finally being are coming to the forefront and being answered. And we're getting a lot of these Lewisisms, which I've grown quite fond of. But I think the thing that I really am taking out of this is the whole idea of those, was the statement of, in the end, there are those that say, to God, thy will be done, or those to whom God says, thy will be done. That's just really poignant, and I don't think I'm going to forget that anytime soon. That's just, you don't think about it in that regard, but when you look at it, it's tough to argue with. Anything else, guys? Yeah, I apologize. I'm not as profound because, again, I'm reading this fresh with y'all.